should be able to record from this moment on.
Yes, it works now. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, it's not. I'm really not to this, so it took me a while. And also, I discovered it by pure chance. By the way, all this option management in Zoom really sucks. Oh well.
Alessio?
Yes?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hi. Just one single question. During this morning, I update the Rhino from 6.25 to 6.27, and the code fails.
It fails? Yeah. Do you have orange components?
Yeah, I had that. So at the end, I realized that it was much better to uninstall it and install the 6.25, and everything's working well with that.
No, I didn't know that. But if the components are just orange and not red, I mean, there is a error warning which is related to culture and public token. I mean, you get that error, but the algorithm should work anyway.
Okay, perfect. Well,
if it was just orange components, it's not a problem. The problem is if you have like null results coming out that is that thing about different versions. Yeah, it's something that is not easy to solve. I mean, the only one-way solution is to compile everything into a GHA library. I will do that at some point in the future. At this point, it's more convenient to me to be able to act fast on the code, and also would like to let those who are confident with C# to take a peek and maybe do their own thing inside if they want.
Okay, perfect. So, and yeah, as well, I have other issue, which is with my ITA card. So it became to have several bugs in the Rhino window. So at the end, it's much better to the 0.25 version.
Oh, so, there are issues with the graphic driver with ATI cards?
Yeah,
Oh man.
No.
Oh man. Okay, that's a mess.
Yeah. So I just download again this version, and then everything is working well again.
Great. The important thing is everything is working now. That's the good takeaway of it. Good to know. Well, everything good so far? Any other questions or anything? Just
these recordings are in as live stream in YouTube for.
Yes, we are live streaming on YouTube on the Code 8 channel.
Yeah. So okay. Because I have some unstable connection. Sometimes I'm just losing few parts.
Oh, okay. If there is anything substantial, please don't mind interrupting me or letting me go through something again if you feel you're not confident. Okay. Because yeah, I'll tell you, in this case, I mean, the basic building blocks of the system should be very well understood because from this point on, I mean, it's not a very complicated workflow all in all, but the things, the data structure and the structure of all things we're going to add up things to it so that if you're not sure about something, it's better to clarify it now rather than keeping this hole in the knowledge and then accumulate weight on it.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Welcome. So, all right, it's 3:45, so it's time to move on. Did any of you had the chance to do some experimentation? Did you find any difficulties? Anything that worth noting that you would like to say or ask after this few minutes of break? Or otherwise we go on with the next argument.
All good.
Everything
is, yes.
All good. Great. So the next thing would be, all right, now we see that, did you get how the thing is working, no? Right, you're starting to get the basic mechanisms, the way in which the system is operating. Well, now it's time to put some constraints in place. Now you see like the unbridled version of the random system. So let's start to put the, let's say, most elementary kind of constraints in place. So we're gonna add some environment to the system. Parts of the environment that the system needs to avoid and parts of the environment that will contain the system, that the system cannot escape. So if you want, we can open the number 03, the environmental objects. So as per usual, you will have to relocate the assemblies DLL once you open the definition, but once you save it, it should have the path in your system. So you just have to do this only the first time you open this definition, then you save them and you're okay. So this definition of the environmental object, it's all in all identical to the previous one, except for this part. And if you look into the Rhino window, you will see there are a few more geometries around this time. So these geometries are custom geometries that you can define, and the dark gray one, the thick one, let's say the full ones, the solid ones, these are the obstacles that the system should avoid. And the wireframe one is the containment object. So the system basically now, it won't be able to go inside this solid objects and is not able to escape this wireframe object. Actually, the way it is implemented right now is not like a strict system. So it's not treated like a collision. between the collision geometry of the object and these objects is more of the inclusion of the center of the object. The center of the object is like the origin of the reference plane of the object. So part of the object will still be able, you will see it still compenetrating, but it's more of a way in which the system interprets them. Of course, both of the condition can be implemented, and it is one of my one of the possibilities is to give the option to the user to choose if you want to have a strict condition or like this less strict condition of inclusion. At this time, I think it doesn't really make that much difference to choose one or the other, so I left this one in place. But if you prefer like a strict condition, I can just make a simple update to the system and make it available. So these geometries needs to be defined as meshes. So in this case, they have been generated inside Grasshopper from box geometry. You define a mesh box and a sphere, a mesh sphere. It's not so important that they are exactly super detailed or super accurate. These are more literally little more than bounding boxes. To say, okay, I don't want them to go through a certain part of my environment. Let's say that we are talking a sort of an urban environment. If you have buildings, you're building in an area and you have buildings in the surroundings, it's not necessary to model the buildings with all the detail that they have. You can put like really bounding boxes in place. That depends also on how you want your system to be accurate and precise when acting on the environment. But in general, I mean, or for the sake of our workshop, let's keep them really, really as an elementary geometry, a little more than bounding boxes or low poly objects. You don't have to, let's say, model blobs or something like that. And to model a container, you still have to model a mesh, but in order for the system to be recognized as a container and not an avoidance object, you just have to flip the normal inwards. So these have the normal pointing outwards. This box outside has the normal pointing inwards. So this is how the system makes sense of a container versus an obstacle. So these two, sphere and box inside are obstacles. The large box in wireframe is a container. Of course, if you wish, you can customize the appearance of these. We have the same heuristic reader as before. It's going to read the same heuristic text file as before. So we're going to give the system the full heuristic set, maximum freedom of operation. So I'm going to reset the system, and if you grow, let's say we grow a little more than one step at a time. So yeah, you can already see that the system is avoiding. It's slightly like dipping into the sphere, but it's not. There is nothing in there completely. It means that the center of this object is still outside the sphere. So if I just switch the preview off, you see that the system is stopping right there. And you can go on. Oh, sorry, I reset the system. I actually did the opposite. Yeah, that's not smart to put the reset so close to the step. Note for the design later. Actually, you know what? Yeah. Okay, the system is developing, but one of the things that we can do with the system is also that we can change this object in the environment without resetting the system. Using this reset environment button. So suppose you want to change the way your system grows, or you want to change the position of your obstacles. So let's say that I'm changing the position of this obstacle here, right? This obstacle is generated from this internalized point. So I want to move my obstacle from here to here. Yeah, more or less. So that the system should not interfere with the new obstacle position right now. After modifying the environment the way I want, all I have to do is to press reset environment. And now if you go on, the system should have made sense of the new environment configuration. So it has grown a little bit in here, but you can see it's avoided the obstacle in the new position. So one thing is using the obstacles to move around and avoid things. The other interesting part of this is that instead of moving the obstacles around, you can make smaller containment volumes and place them in the position where you want the system to grow at the specific moment. And then maybe you start having the important thing is not to overdo this, otherwise you're steering the system manually at all times. But for broad strokes, so to speak, let's say that you start having a very extensive assemblies, like a very big extended, and then you say, oh, I would like the assemblies to grow a little bit more in this area. And then you can put up a containment in that area and say, okay, let's hit step a certain number of times and see how the system develops in this area. And then you say, let's try that area right now. Of course, it's a very manual kind of intervention. It's a lot of individual decision in here. So this is why I am telling you, try not to overdo that. This should be done in broad stroke, not just cherry picking the part or in a way try to bend the system to do what you exactly want to do as a result, because otherwise this will kill the purpose of having a system that you give decisional capacity to. But in some cases, you might want to maintain the ability to steer a little bit, not just leave the system completely to itself. So this could be useful, or say, well, you know what, let's sprinkle a little more component here and there, because yeah, I feel that there could be a few more. It's not exactly like delivering a completely intelligent system, but it can help design-wise sometimes to be able to make this sort of adjustment while still remaining in the logics of the system. Okay, so the option is here, but do not abuse of it. You can define as many environmental objects as you want, but of course, still, again, both in terms of the resolution of the object, in terms of the number, it's important to do not constrain too much the system. One of the things that I notice giving a similar system to other students is that sometimes the appeal of trying to design something like this, for instance, in an urban area, made the students choose a very, very limited area, a limited plot of terrain, and the system was incredibly suffocated by a lot of volumes in the surrounding. So in the end, the system was not able to fully express its capacities in those in that context. So you have to be aware this is a kind of a design sensibility that needs to be developed also through experimentation. You need to be aware of the relation between the scale of your building blocks, the scale of your components, the scale of the environment that you are choosing, and the scale of what is the result that you are expecting. For this workshop, I'm not putting any heavy constraints, so you are very loose in terms of being able to choose your own environment. So also because I received some requests that I happily positively respond to. So there are, maybe some of you want to use this kind of strategies and things to go forward in an argument that it's of your own interest. And maybe this is a chance to adapt this to some kind of design problem that you already have, or design opportunity and exploration that you have. I'm more than happy that you can bring this in and test the system with that, provided that you let the system express itself, and it's more of an experimental nature what you do in here. So that's enough for the environment. So the environment part, it's pretty easy. The environment mesh connects in here in the penultimate input of the main component. So this is the environment here, and also the option for reset environment. So let's go to the field, but do not open the field. Let's open the field standalone first, the 4_0. Because then I want to explain something about the field that is easier to understand in the standalone version. Okay, the field components are positioned in a weird location on the canvas, but it's so just that if you want, you can just copy and paste in place in the other definition, and they won't overlap with the rest of the setup. So the field starts with basically the same volume that we used in the previous definition as a container. And it starts defining a few things. So first of all, how is a field defined? This is very, very in the same line of how WASP does it, which is to make a field, you basically fill a volume with a matrix of points with a certain resolution. So you basically voxelize the space with a certain resolution. This resolution is a resolution in Rhino units. So you should know the size of your box before setting the resolution. Also because if you set the resolution too low, you're going to have a field that is so dense that it's going to be dragging the system down, or in the worst case, hang up your computer or be uncomputable from your system, because there's too much data. So the resolution and the distribution of the data should be, let's say, enough to make sense of the variation that you want to implement in the field, but also not too dense, because otherwise the system will take too long to process every time. So you have to strike a balance between resolution, accuracy, and speed of calculation in here. So in this case, to generate a field, you will always have to provide an empty box. In general, this doesn't have to coincide with a containment box of your system. You can place a field anytime, anywhere. But if you use a field-based criteria, then the system will look for the data distribution in the volume that you've set up. So in this case, what you're visualizing is the benchmark vector field that I was showing in the picture earlier. So this volume is filled with a three-dimensional grid of points according to this resolution. And to each point, there are several things that can be attached. One is a scalar value, like a numerical value, normalized, which means from 0 to 1. So you can implement gradients, you can implement a lot of things, decide, let's say, intensities. And then if you use a scalar field, then you can set a threshold value to make some choices with your system. And you can have a direction, like in this case. So you generate a vector field, like in this case. So to each of the position, there is a vector attached. What the system does once you feed the field to the system is, according to the position that you choose for your next component to be attached to the assemblage, is going to locate the closest data point in the field to that location. And according to the closest point, is going to read that information and act accordingly. It could be the scalar information, it could be the vector information. There's another kind of information that I'm going to explain a little bit later. But the system acts on a closest point basis. So this is about the field design. So if you design a field, make sure that it's more or less in a location or with an extension that is enough to cover your assemblage. Otherwise, I mean, if you have your components located outside the field box, like way over here, and you have a field criteria, they're going to look for the data on the closest point. So the result will start to lose sense with comparing it to the field. So the field should be at least surrounding all the time the object that you are using for growth. Okay, your assemblage. So the first thing, you decide the resolution, and what you output out of here is the empty grid of points. So the field contains an empty grid of location ready to be filled with data. Then you can fill several types of data. Let's skip this part for a moment. This is where you populate the field with data. So you have a scalar data or a vector data. And then you can, from this component, you have the field in output. This is what then will go into the main component. Then you can see the point, you can see the list of the scalar values and the list of the vectors that are associated with each point. This is for visualization purposes. So you can see the vector data of the field, like in this case. And if we switch the preview, sorry, wrong key combination. If you switch to the scalar preview, the scalar preview in this case is determined by this curve. So the vector preview, the vector data is very simple. So you scan the x-coordinate of each point. If the x-coordinate is below a certain number, then you associate the x vector, otherwise the z vector. So that's how the benchmark field was generated. In this case, the scalar field, it's just determined by the distance of each point to the closest point to the curve. So we got a curve, this one, get the closest point, the distance, we remap the distance to a normalized range between 0 and 1, and then I use this graph mapper to tweak the gradient of data so that the variation is not linear anymore, but it's something more like a quadratic variation. Right? So you can use this to change the nature of the field according to the object that generates the field. But basically, yeah, all the scalar fields are generated based on the position of the points, and the vector field are generated according to the orientation of the point compared to something. So you basically give information that are intensities, the scalar field, and directionality, which is the vector field. So you can change the curve, you can change this relation. You can also, if you have the noise plugin by Giulio Piacentino, you can generate a noise field, because that noise works with points. For each point, it will generate a noise value, and then you can have also noise fields to drive your assemblage. In this case, the curve serves because then the highest value are the value that correspond to the least distance. Sorry, the lowest value corresponds to the least distance. In this case, it's just that the gradient puts in white the lowest values. Then there are other options to build the values in the field. So one of these is to use attractor points. Oops, sorry. Didn't mean to do that. So in this case, I'm working with these two attractors. Let me just switch the curve off, otherwise it's gonna mess visually. So let's say they have these two attractor points, right? And I want to make a distribution that is a distribution of data that is done according to these points here. So I can use this distribution here. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I paused for a while because I did not remember why there was a void in here. Now I remember because, yeah, never mind. So what happens in here is this W are a range of weights. And then I can change the distribution of these weights in space according to these two attractor points. I have two lists of weights. One goes from 0 to 40. The one is the reverse of the list. So this list will go from 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. When I feed these values and this attractor point to the empty field, each of the points in the field will have this sort of weights associated with this option for blending. Let me show you better with the text. So I can visualize this. Careful because it's it takes a while to do the visualization, because visualizing text, it's a pretty heavy operation. So if we are close to this point here, this point here corresponds to the list from 0 to 40. And the closer we get to the point, the closer we get to these values, right? We are just one digit away from exactly this list. And we are very, very close to the point, right? The more we get far from this point and the more we get close to the other point, the more these values starts transforming. So the first value will transform from 0 when it's close to the first attractor to 40 when it's close to the second attractor. If I set the blend to false, it takes a while to update because of the text thing. You will see that in the area where the points are, when this attractor is closer than the other, all of the points for which this attractor is closer will have the first list assigned. So it becomes more or less like a Voronoi partition of space. At some point in here, the value will snap from 0 to 40 to 40 to 0. Yeah. So you see, here is like 0 to 40, and if you go to the next cell, it's 40 to 0. So how can this be useful in a way? This list of weights can be associated with the weights of the rules, but this is not implemented yet. What can be implemented right now is that instead of a list of these rules like this, let me just switch off the text because it takes really so long to update. We're gonna visualize this thing in colors and I'll show you how. Instead of this, we can put in this entwine the index or the IDs for the heuristics. So let's say that we want to use two heuristics. One when we are closer to this point and one when we are closer to this. So when we are close to this, the system will choose from a certain set of rules. And when we are close to the other point, the system will switch and choose among another set of rules. So what you'll have to do is to have like index 0 in here, which will be, okay, these are the heuristics at the index 0 in the list of heuristics that I'm going to input. And this is going to be index 1 right there. And I don't need to reverse in this case. So we're going to have just zeros and ones. And we can visualize this as a condition with colors. Just follow this. To visualize the thing in color, we simply need to input, instead of the numerical weight, the color as RGB weights for each point. So just copy paste this component here and attach to the W input, to the weight input, the RGB of the color as weights. Let's bring this closer. Then you can attach the weights here to the weight channel in here. So you see that now the blend option is deactivated. So you see exactly where is the frontier where the values switch from the set that enters here in 0 to the set that enters here in 1, to whatever is closer to this point, to whatever is closer to this other point. Of course, if you move them around, the barrier is changing. Since this time we are not visualizing that many digits as before, actually let me also reduce, let me increment this value so we have less data to deal with.
Excuse me, but for me, all those C# components are red.
By any chance, are you having the same issue as before, which is maybe you're using an old version of the assemblies DLL?
I put the DLL that you gave us today.
Ah, okay. Is it blocked?
Missing the weight stuff.
Is it blocked? By any chance?
No, it's not blocked. Everything else is working, but not this one.
This definition, the entire definition, all the components are red and not working?
No, just there is not the get weight method.
Actually, I have the same problem, and every other component works except these two ones, and it
All
says
right.
error about the get weights.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
assemblage field doesn't contain a definition for get weights.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Let me see. This one is the one that I'm using, and it's because I exactly put into a zip file this DLL that I'm using in the Grasshopper libraries. Are you sure? It's the link that I pasted in the chat, right?
Actually, I used the link which you said that was the newest one, but I can try reinstalling and.
No, I didn't see you. You sent another one.
No. Yeah, that's what I meant.
chat.
Because probably, probably I accidentally put yesterday an older version of the library. So download the DLL that is linked in the Zoom chat.
Okay, no problem. Thanks.
That should make things work, because that's exactly what I'm using. So sorry, I think I did a mix up this morning when I updated the files in Google Drive. That's my bad, actually. Yeah, the only pity is that you have to restart things.
Yeah, but keep going and.
Okay. Well, I'll just have to explain a bit of things in here. So let me activate the text here, so you can see the text. Actually, should be able to see the text switching from 0 to 1. Maybe if we increase the size. Okay. And have like a bit of a color to highlight. Should stick out better. Okay, now we're talking. So you see that the values right now are switching from 0 to 1 according to the area in which they are. You can define even more attractor points and associate a value or a list of values for each attractor. The important thing is if you're using this weight thing, that each of the input in here should have the same amount of value. So if it's a single value, all of these should be single values. If this has a list of weights and you want to use it with the rules, that's more complicated because that's not implemented yet. So it's here as a demo, but if you want to use it for your assemblies at the moment, the only thing we can use is this. And actually, I think I'll explain this part of the assemblage technique maybe tomorrow. For the time being, just know that for making this work with the heuristics, you should keep blend to false, so you have this sharp threshold between the two values. If you set blend to true, this acts like a continuous field, and you see the values should be. Oh no, actually, because the values are rounded anyway. Because of the nature of the weights should be integers. If I'm using 0 and 1, 0 and 1 are still blended in the same way, which means there's a threshold which is more or less like half of the distance between the points where the values switch. But if you put a larger number in here, you will see if you put like 100, it's gonna do like a sort of an integer gradient. So from 100 to 99, yeah, that's it. It's just that the values are approximated to their integer part. But consider that, I mean, this is the effect of the field, but to use it with the weights so far and the weights of the heuristics, these numbers that you use as weights should be the index of the heuristics that you're using. So it works only when you are using more than one heuristic set. If you want to associate it to a different regions of space, and if they both are associated to an attractor point. At the moment, for those who want, like, this is an already kind of an advanced way of using the assemblages. But if anybody wants to experiment with that, I think we'll go into more depth about it tomorrow, also with some post-processing. So finishing a little bit the weight thing, you can also associate the weight with the scalar field. So the weights can be associated by putting some attractor points in here, or yeah, just let me switch this off. By the scalar field. So for this, what you need is an empty field or any other sort of field, because it's not going to care about anything in the rest of the field. It's just going to fill the weight part. For this to work, you need to have a field that is already populated of scalar values, because it's going to distribute the weight according to those scalar values. Otherwise, it won't happen. So what I mean is, again, to see it with the colors. I'm sorry, because I forgot. I thought the association with the library was working in a different way, and I made things more complicated by trying to make them easier. So sorry about this. So what we do is in the same way that we did before, we just copy paste another one of these guys. And in place of the weights here, we're going to connect again the colors. So these colors, since we have like two values in the scalar field, two colors are enough. And if we connect the field weights to the weight here for the display, you will see that right now the switch in the weights is following the curve. So we could use it as same thing to switch heuristics from one set to another. But this configuration using the scalar value allows you a lot more flexibility than just the attractors, because then you can decide specific areas and you can drive them by geometry. I mean, the scalar field is actually the most versatile techniques here, because you can generate a field of value from any sort of geometry. You just have to think how to relate this geometry to a 3D matrix of points, basically by closest points, distances, and so on. So you generate, distance field is like the easiest and more versatile kind of option here. And you can use any sort of object. So you can put like the classic mesh rabbit, the Stanford rabbit, and make a distance field based on the Stanford rabbit. It doesn't make much sense on a design standpoint, but well, technically the data is still that thing. But in terms of design, driving the assemblage with the field and having the field following a curve can lead to some interesting results. Like some tests that I was doing, and I would like to show to you in a second. I'm just having to pick them up. Like this one, for instance. This is exactly, it's a system made just of the first component, the stick, that is following the growth rules of the scalar field around the curve. So you can see that it's able to follow the geometry quite precisely. This one is also a chronological view, and you see that in this case, the chronology of the object, the chronology of the object, it's pretty much following around. So you see that the growth happened more or less continuously from this spot to this spot again, then there was some indecision in here, and then to the spot at the end over there. So let's go and see as a last thing for today. Let me go back to the material folder. Let's see the field inside the definition with the growth. And then we have the last part, which is the load and save. Okay, this one is, let's say, more comprehensive growth definition that includes the field. Let's say that for this cases, for this scenario, and for simplicity, for the time being, let's consider just the scalar and the vector field. Let's leave the weight to the side for now. Okay, let's just focus on the scalar and vector field. So the field that we get here, populated with our scalar and vector values, will go into the field input here, over here. And we have a new parameter here, which is the field threshold. The field threshold is, okay, which is the value that you want the component to stay closer to. What happens in the process is that whenever a component needs to be added and an allocation for growth is identified, then the assemblies, or also while trying to locate let me start from the beginning. Sorry, I got stuck up. So if we activate the field selection, even in selecting the spot where to grow next, the algorithm is going to search among the available objects for the object whose location has the value, the corresponding field value, which is closer to the threshold. And then of all the possible options around that object, is going to choose the one that is still the closer to the threshold. You have to, here in select receiver, shift from the random to the scalar field, and select rule from random to scalar field. So when you select these two options, selecting the receiver is going to scan all the possible objects and select the receiver whose position is in a position in the field that has a value that is as close as possible to this threshold. And when that was done, among all the possible objects that can be applied to that receiver, is going to select again the one whose position has a corresponding scalar field value as close to this threshold as possible. What is how do you make sense of this on a design perspective? So let's say compared to the curve, right? So let me increment the number of steps here. Let me hit preset once. If you change anything in the field, you will have to reset the assembly, the whole assemblies again. So if I hit step, so according to the heuristics that we've been feeding, okay, we are feeding a very weird heuristics right now. So it doesn't appear to follow very much along the curve. So let me feed more comprehensive heuristics. So let's go with the full heuristics. Because if you start with a heuristic that it's already quite restricted, it's really hard to catch the contribution of the field. Okay, now it's better. So you can see that the system is developing and it's trying to stay as close as possible to the curve. I reset, oh man. I'm really tired. I was hitting reset, thinking of hitting step. Sorry about that. Yeah, so if you go on and let the system go for a while, you'll see that it's trying to copy the curve, because the threshold, it's actually set to a value close to 0. If you remember the shape of the scalar values in the field, so let's try to switch them off again. On again, sorry. Remember, the bright values are closer to 0 and the darker values are closer to 1. So if we set the threshold closer to the to 0, in this case, we are telling the system, hey, stay as close as possible to the curve. So again,
is there a reason why it seems to be very more demanding for the computer to add those rules?
Yes, because the random actually doesn't do any sort of comparison or evaluation. If you pick at random, any object will do. So random is actually one instruction, it's picking one index, but in this case, to find the object that is closer to the field value, first of all, look at the availability of the object. You see, we have a lot of available objects, and the number of available objects generally increases as your assemblies grows, right? Because you have more objects, and if more or less, let's say, the percentage of the available object versus the total object stays is most of the time inevitably the sheer number of available objects arises as the assemblies grows. So you will have to scan all of them and find the one with the value closer to the threshold that we have given. So this operation alone becomes more demanding. Even if it's quite, it can be accelerated a little, but right now it's not even too much optimized. But this reason alone is reason for why the system becomes slower. The other reason is in selecting the object, you will have to do the same among these possibilities here. But this is like a slower number. It depends on the number of rules. It depends on, actually these possibilities are already filtered by the object that collide with the surroundings. So this is actually a less demanding step up, but the initial search, yes, it's not an impression. The system becomes slower. But it's actually that reflects the fact that if you act without thinking, you act faster. If you have to think every time you act, the action becomes slower. So you can go on and see the system that is following. You can also do like the opposite. What if you want the curve to be a sort of a void? Well, in this case, you set the threshold to a high value. So if you set the threshold, say, to 0.8, instead of following the curve, the system will avoid the curve, actually. So let's set the threshold to a sort of a 0.8. We reset the system. So you see the system will start to develop around the curve, but trying to avoid the areas where the curve is passing through. So we'll actually try to fill the space in between. So you have this possibility working with the field. using an object both as an attractor for assemblies or an attractor for voids, actually. It's a different way of using, let's say, environmental obstacles, because it's a more kind of a soft barrier. Because actually, if you let the system go long enough, is going to eventually saturate all the parts of the space. Because there is no, actually there is no block that says if you are below this distance or above this distance from the threshold, don't put anything. This is something that I might include in the code in the future. At the moment, there is no such thing. The system doesn't stop. So if you let the system go long enough, it will still eventually saturate all the space. But I think it could be also, together with the threshold, there should be also the possibility of including a range. Like, okay, we have the threshold that you have to try to get to stick to, and you're allowed a certain leeway, but not too much. The practical way in which the system does it is say, okay, let's evaluate the field value at this point. Let's make the value minus the threshold. Let's get the absolute of that difference. Okay, how far are we from the value? This is the measure of the distance between values. We measure the distance for all the available objects, and then we pick the one with the smallest distance to the threshold. And then we can also say, okay, let's measure this different value difference. And if this value difference is above a certain range, then I'm just not adding anything anymore. So it could be one way of stopping the system or limiting the system further. Right now it's not encoded, but yeah, it could be. So you can try this with different heuristics, different combinations. One thing that you might want to try is also to, but in this case, you'll have also to rewrite the heuristics to have a system with just one kind of an object. But for that, remember that if you change the assembly object set, you don't have just to change to reset the system, but also to have the heuristics that comply with the set. Because right now, if you try to use this heuristics that is looking for two objects, with a single object, you're going to get an error, because at some point there's going to be a rule that says, okay, I need not just the stick, but also the L. Where's the L? I can't find the L. There's nothing in there if you remove this. Okay, if you remove this, then the system would not make sense of it. But it could be interesting to try how like a single object performs in the assemblies according to the possibilities of its heuristics. So let's see the vector field as a last thing for the field. So I can reset this thing. And let me switch the display to the vector field. So we're going to deactivate this and activate this. I'm just going to show you the benchmark field just to show you the difference between the two things. And in the criteria, just to let the system have more freedom of operation, the select rule is going to be driven by the vector field, and the select receiver, the receiving position, we're going to leave it to the random just to not have too many constraints on that. Why the vector field can be used only here? Because vector field is a measure of orientation. But yeah, in fact, well, I could also implement something in here, but I don't know how much sense would it make on a design standpoint. Because the comparison is actually the vector angle between the direction of the component and the direction of the field locally. Actually, not exactly that. It's more something like this. Pardon me, but I'm sketching with the mouse. So if this is the field direction, and let's say this one, this one, ooh, I could have picked a better color for that. Sorry, let's try to do it again with this one, and one more. This one are three possible components direction compared to this field. The system is gonna look at this direction for the time being bidirectionally, which means that in order of preference, the system will pick the red first, the green second, and the orange third. Because it doesn't matter where's the arrow pointing, is the direction of the line of the vector. If they are more similar, which means they are how much parallel are they to each other without considering where the arrow is pointing. Because then you can not just, you can look at the direction of the component in pointing one way or pointing the other way, but the direction, if a component is something like this, it develops in length. It doesn't matter if it has the nose on the right or the nose on the left, and the tail on the right, the tail on the left. Nose and tail, in this case, are considered the same. Now, how do I erase this? Yeah, any clear? All right. So let's start the assemblies, and then I'll explain you something. So let's reset, start the assemblage, and go a few steps further. So as you can see, the system, it's changing its nature from one side to the other. But as you can see, it's not exactly that this part of the field will enhance verticality. This part of the field will enhance those components whose direction is parallel to this. Let's pay attention to how the components are defined. So we make sense of why this is happening, like why these components, the L components, are like laid horizontally. Because that depends on what is the direction vector for those components. So this is the stick. Let me switch to wireframe preview. So this is the stick. The stick has a direction vector, which is the x vector. So it means it's this, right? The absolute x vector is going in exactly parallel to the longitudinal direction of our component. But the other component, this one, if you can notice, its direction vector was defined as y, which is the perpendicular one. So when trying to orient itself with this sort of field, it means that this component will be rotated 90 degrees and have the L laying flat like this. So it's actually behaving how it's supposed to. It's just that we define this component like this with this direction vector. So it's the angle, like I said, the angle, the absolute angle or the absolute projection of the component vector to the closest field vector that determine who is the winner. So the one who has the longest projection on the vector is the component that will stay. So if it's according to the rules, according to the positions, so in this case, this component tend to be laid out vertically, and this component will tend to be laid out horizontally. If you have a more complex field, the effect can also be maybe less predictable, less mixed up. It's basically being made out of discrete parts. The component cannot, let's say, completely copy or become a sort of a carbon copy of the vector field. The system does his fair amount of interpretation. But that's exactly how a system basically responds. There are both external pressure and an internal order. So the internal order, or the endogenous factors, if you wanna if you wanna talk about the system, are driven by the decisional criteria and the rules that are written in the heuristics, and also determined by the geometry of the components, their connectivity, their rules. So all of this, like heuristics, decision, it's part of the relational constitution of a system. And the geometry, the position of the handles is the object, the objectual part of the system. And both of them are contributing to the endogenous aspect of the system. And then there's external data, how this external data, like a field, a scalar or vector field, is influencing the growth of the system in space. So the external data is affecting the system, but cannot change what are the endogenous internal rules of the system. And at the same time, the endogenous rules, being iterative, have the chance to act in an adaptive manner when you polarize the surroundings with information, with a field of information, be it vector, be it scalar. Okay, other questions? Because then more or less we've covered almost every parameter, input parameter in here. So in this case, let's say that the weight thing would be implemented here, but we'll talk about that more in detail tomorrow. If you want to do some more experiments this afternoon after 5, do your experiment, but leave these two parameters to manual and this parameter to 0, okay? So as a very, very last thing, if there are no questions about this part of the field, if there are no questions, then I'll do the last definition for today, which is load and save.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so if you open the definition for load and save, so what happens if you have an assemblage that you really, really like, and then you say, okay, I want to save it somehow. So let me go back to the previous definition of the field. So okay, I would like to save this somehow. The only option before what I'm about to show you would be, okay, let me take the mesh, or let's decompose the assembly object and save bake the meshes into Rhino, or do something like that. But in doing so, you are effectively losing a lot of information. All the connectivity information that it's in the handles, all of these aspects that you're going to see also tomorrow will be lost. So one option, let's go back to the load and save, is that once you have your assemblage, you can use this component to save your assemblage to a file. There are some assemblages that I have already pre-saved here in the assemblages subfolder. So in your material assemblages, you will see there are some text files which are the assemblages. So what this component saves, oh, what's happening? Sorry, I think I hit like a hot corner or something, because everything like kind of disappeared. All right, sorry. So the thing that you're saving are all the information about the assemblage, not just the geometry, but also that connectivity information, also the extra information that you store in the components, that you store in the handles, into a text file. And then you can retrieve it at will, provided that you still have the original assembly object set that you started from when you were doing the assemblies. Since all of the assemblies were done using this assembly object set, I can reload any of these. So let's start with the first. So let's say that we look at it. It's the same set of components for loading and saving the heuristics, except right now is looking at a folder called assemblages. So this one is still the one that generates the local path for the GH file, and this adds the subfolder assemblages. So it's just saying, go wherever your Grasshopper definition is, look for a subfolder called assemblages, and then save this file name. It's going to save it as a txt into that location, if you have an assemblage file to save. So in this case, this one should be connected to the output of the assemblage component. But if you want to load an assemblage, all you need is your original assembly object set. So let's go read in the directory. We pick the first file and we can load it. So once you load it, it's going to rebuild the assemblage immediately. And the interesting thing is that you don't even lose the topology of it, which is the connectivity. So tomorrow we're going to look more in deep into this topology aspect and how it is saved and retrieved and what is its syntax, because this is exactly the topology information for each component. I'll explain it tomorrow. I'll explain tomorrow how it is structured. So if you load another file from here, like this one, takes a little more to load because this is a little bit more extensive. The interesting thing is that actually, if you think about it, they don't even need to be the same original assembly object. I mean, if you make variations and you say, okay, let's, I mean, in this case, this one was done with only one assembly object. The important thing is that the assembly object that you are loading are included in the set that you have in the definition. Or you can make changes to the geometry of this one. It will just try to place it, or actually will place it in the same position where you saved it, and then update its connectivity information in the handles and in the component with the one that comes from the saved file. But if the geometry, instead of being this, it's like a slightly more elaborated stick with, let's say, a slit somewhere, or there are some other changes, all you do is just substitute this with another geometry. So you can actually remember just the assemblage data and use the assemblage data with a different set of components, provided they have the same geometric compatibility. Okay, so you can save things and use them to make a lot more experiments. And then you can have fun trying to load as many of these as you want. This was something that I was trying to saturate a little bit the box. Okay. It's taking a while to load this. All right, we should be good. So yeah, there are a few, but you can, for example, where did it go? You can copy paste this guy here, or all this guy here, comprise the path generator into the one of the growth from the random growth here. All you have to attach is this this one, the assemblage output. This one is the one that needs to be saved. It's the one that goes in here. So look for the output called AOA, assembly object assemblage, which is here. And then you can load and save your configurations. So I think that will be it for today. Any questions about this?
Yes, I have a small question.
Sure.
Maybe you keep it for tomorrow, but if I understand if I understand well, if I want to dispatch my different elements according to some local properties, like let's say not geometry related, but something else, I should use like scalar fields to do that, for example?
That would be the wise option.
Okay.
Because then you can use any data, say environmental data,
Yeah.
or any other data like concentration of something. The scalar field has exactly the capability to distribute a number. It could be a field of temperature, for instance.
Yeah.
Or something, just to relate to some physical world data. But yeah, you're right. That's the option right now to do that.
All I have to do is to just get my data the same order in my list that my parts. Is that right?
You basically you generate this empty point matrix, which is an empty field.
Mm.
And then whatever is if you have already some the data in some specialized format, let's say, all you do is for each of the point of your field, you try to capture the closest point in the other data set.
Mm. Okay.
Or the n closest point and make an average. I mean, you find a conversion system that works for you, so that in the end you end up with a populated field. So for each of the points in the field, you have a scalar value.
Okay, thank you. I will play a little bit with that.
Okay, cool. Anything? Now it's also the time for the auditors if they have questions. Are there any auditors? Because how many? I mean, we are 12, so probably there is an auditor after all. So, guys, that's all for today, I think. So we'll see you tomorrow at 9. If you want to experiment a little bit with what you're doing, feel free to do so. And now I'm going to just close the screen for today, close the stream for today, and I'm going to see you tomorrow at 9. Okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hope you enjoyed today, and let's see if we can enjoy tomorrow even more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye. Bye. Bye.
See you.
See you.